I felt his eyes on me across the kitchen island, intense and knowing. My husband had just gone upstairs, his heavy footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving Owen and me alone with the lingering warmth of wine and unspoken possibilities. The silence stretched between us, thick with something I'd been trying to ignore all evening. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Clara, we both know why I'm still here." My breath caught. I should have walked away. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. Before we dive deeper, hit that like button and subscribe if you're ready for what comes next. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. The evening had started innocently enough. Ben's cousin Owen was visiting Boston for work, and we'd invited him for dinner. It had been months since I'd felt genuinely excited about anything. Months since Ben and I had shared more than perfunctory conversation about schedules and bills. But when Owen walked through our door, something shifted in the air. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, really looked, like he was seeing something Ben had stopped noticing years ago. Dinner conversation flowed easily. Owen was charming, attentive, asking questions about my photography, remembering details from conversations we'd had at family gatherings. Ben, exhausted from another long day teaching, barely participated. By the time we'd finished the bottle of wine, Ben was yawning openly. "I think I'm going to call it a night," Ben announced, stretching. "Owen, feel free to stay up as long as you want. Clara's always been the night owl anyway." He kissed my forehead absently, the kind of gesture that had become automatic over 17 years of marriage. I watched him climb the stairs, listening to his routine. Bathroom, teeth brushing, the familiar creak of our bedroom floor. Within 20 minutes, I could hear his soft snoring drifting down. Owen and I cleared the dishes in comfortable silence, our hands occasionally brushing as we moved around the kitchen. Each contact sent a small jolt through me, awakening something I'd almost forgotten existed. When we finished, he leaned against the counter, studying me with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through all my carefully constructed walls. "You seem different tonight," he said quietly. I poured myself another glass of wine, needing something to do with my hands. "Different how?" "Alive, present. Like you're actually here instead of going through the motions." The observation hit too close to home. "I don't know what you mean." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woody and masculine that made my pulse quicken. "Clara, when's the last time someone really saw you?" The question hung in the air between us. I wanted to give him a flip answer, to deflect with humor or change the subject entirely. Instead, I found myself being honest. "I can't remember." His hand came up slowly, fingers barely grazing my cheek. "That's a crime. I should have stepped back." Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to put distance between us, to send him to the guest room, to pretend this conversation never happened. But I was so tired of being rational, so exhausted from being the responsible wife, the perfect hostess, the woman who always did the right thing. "Owen," I whispered, not quite a warning, not quite an invitation. "I know," he said softly. "I know this is complicated. I know he's my cousin. I know you're married. But Clara, I also know that you're standing here looking at me like you're drowning and I'm the only one who can pull you to shore." His words undid something inside me. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the loneliness I'd been carrying for so long. Or maybe it was simply that someone finally saw me as more than Ben's wife or the woman who organized family gatherings. Whatever it was, I felt myself taking a step closer instead of backing away. "We can't," I said, but the words came out breathless, unconvincing even to my own ears. "We can do whatever we want," he replied, his thumb tracing along my jawline. "The question is, what do you want, Clara?" I wanted to feel alive again. I wanted to remember what it was like to be desired, to be seen as a woman instead of just a wife. I wanted to stop being careful and responsible and good for just one night. "Show me," I whispered. He didn't hesitate. His lips found mine in a kiss that was nothing like the careful, familiar kisses I'd grown accustomed to. This was hungry, consuming, full of need and want, and the kind of passion I'd forgotten existed. I melted into him, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. The rational part of my brain tried one last time to assert itself, reminding me that my husband was sleeping just upstairs, that this was his cousin, that this could destroy everything. But Owen's hands were in my hair, his forehead pressed against mine, and all I could think about was how alive I felt. "Not here," I managed to say, glancing toward the ceiling. He nodded, understanding immediately. Taking my hand, he led me toward the living room, away from the stairs, away from the bedroom where Ben slept peacefully above us. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting everything in warm, golden shadows. Owen turned to face me, his hands coming to rest on my waist. "Are you sure about this?" Instead of answering with words, I reached for the buttons of his shirt. My fingers trembled slightly, whether from nerves or anticipation, I couldn't tell. He stood perfectly still, letting me set the pace, his dark eyes never leaving my face. When his shirt fell to the floor, I allowed myself to really look at him. He was different from Ben in every way. Broader shoulders, darker skin, muscles that spoke of time spent outdoors rather than hunched over student papers. My hands explored the planes of his chest, marveling at the way his breath hitched under my touch. His hands found the hem of my blouse, fingers grazing the skin beneath. "You're beautiful," he murmured, and the way he said it made me believe it was true. Clothes disappeared gradually, each piece revealing more skin, more possibilities. When he lifted me onto the couch, I wrapped my legs around his waist, pulling him closer. Everything about this felt different. The urgency, the passion, the way he touched me like he was memorizing every inch. His lips traced a path down my throat, finding spots that made me gasp. I had to bite my lip to keep from making too much noise, acutely aware of the sleeping figure upstairs. The danger of it, the forbidden nature of what we were doing, only heightened every sensation. When he moved lower, his mouth warm against my skin, I arched beneath him, fingers tangling in his hair. He took his time, building the tension until I was trembling, until every nerve ending was alive with need. The careful attention he paid to my body was a revelation. When was the last time someone had focused entirely on my pleasure? "Please," I whispered, not even sure what I was asking for, only knowing I needed more. He rose above me, his eyes searching my face one more time. "Clara, don't stop," I breathed. "Please don't stop." When he joined with me, it was like coming home and setting sail for unknown waters all at once. The rhythm we found was urgent yet tender, desperate yet reverent. I bit down on his shoulder to muffle my cries, tasting salt and skin and possibility. Above us, the house remained silent except for the distant sound of Ben's snoring. The reminder of where we were, what we were risking, sent a thrill through me that was equal parts terror and excitement. Owen's movements became more focused, more intense, and I felt myself spiraling towards something I'd almost forgotten was possible. When the wave finally crashed over me, I pressed my face against his neck, my body trembling with the force of it. He followed moments later, his breath hot against my ear, his hands gripping me like I was his anchor in a storm. We lay tangled together afterward, both of us breathing hard, neither wanting to break the spell by speaking. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my skin while I listened to his heartbeat gradually slow. Reality would intrude soon enough, it always did. But for these stolen moments, I allowed myself to simply exist in the warmth of his arms. "I should go," he finally whispered, though he made no move to leave. "I know, but I tightened my arms around him anyway. This isn't just tonight for me, Clara. I need you to know that." I pulled back to look at him, seeing something in his eyes that made my chest tight. "Owen, I'm not asking you to leave him. I'm not asking for promises or complications. I'm just saying that it means something to me." The honesty in his voice was almost more intimate than anything physical we'd shared. I reached up to touch his face, memorizing the shape of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "It means something to me too," I admitted. He kissed me again, softer this time, like a promise. Then, reluctantly, we began the process of putting ourselves back together. Clothes were retrieved and straightened, hair was finger-combed back into place, evidence was erased. By the time we made our way back to the kitchen, we looked like two people who had simply stayed up talking too late. Owen gathered his things while I loaded the dishwasher, both of us moving with careful casualness. "I'll probably head out early tomorrow," he said, "before Ben gets up." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The thought of him leaving, of going back to whatever this was before tonight, felt suddenly unbearable. "Clara." He waited until I looked at him. "This doesn't have to be the end." "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. "The lying, the sneaking around." "Then don't think of it as lying. Think of it as taking care of yourself for once." He kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it brought tears to my eyes. Then he was gone, disappearing upstairs to the guest room, leaving me alone with the lingering scent of his cologne and the memory of his touch. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the familiar objects of my ordinary life, and tried to reconcile the woman I'd been an hour ago with the woman I was now. Everything looked the same, but I felt fundamentally changed, like Owen had awakened something that had been sleeping for years. Upstairs, Ben continued to snore peacefully, oblivious to the fact that his world had shifted in ways he couldn't imagine. I knew I should feel guilty, should be consumed with shame and regret. Instead, all I felt was alive. I made my way upstairs quietly, slipping into the bathroom to wash away the evidence of what had transpired. In the mirror, I looked like myself again, Same face, same hair, same body. But my eyes were brighter. My skin seemed to glow. I looked like a woman who remembered what it felt like to be desired. Ben didn't stir when I slipped into bed beside him. I lay there in the darkness, hyper-aware of Owen just down the hall, replaying every moment of our encounter. Sleep seemed impossible, but eventually exhaustion won out. I woke to the sound of a car starting in the driveway. Through the bedroom window, I watched Owen's rental car disappear down the street. He was keeping his word, leaving before anyone else was awake. Ben stirred beside me, reaching out sleepily. "Where'd Owen go?" he mumbled. "Early flight," I managed, my voice remarkably steady. He didn't want to wake anyone. Ben grunted and rolled over, already drifting back to sleep. It was Saturday, which meant he'd sleep for another 2 hours at least. I lay there listening to his breathing, feeling the weight of what I'd done settling over me. But instead of guilt, I felt something else entirely: anticipation. Owen had said this didn't have to be the end, and despite all the reasons I should want it to be, I found myself hoping he was right. My phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. "Thank you for last night. I meant what I said." I deleted the message immediately, but not before typing a response I didn't send. I meant what I said too. The next few weeks passed in a haze of ordinary routine punctuated by stolen moments of memory. Owen and I didn't communicate directly, but he was always there in the back of my mind, a secret warmth I carried through the mundane tasks of daily life. Ben noticed the change in me, commenting more than once that I seemed happier, more energetic. If only he knew that his observation was both completely accurate and deeply ironic. "You should call that photographer friend of yours," he suggested one evening over dinner. "Set up that showing you were talking about. You've been taking such great pictures lately." I had been taking better pictures, I realized. Everything looked different through my lens now, more vibrant, more alive. Even ordinary moments seemed charged with possibility. "Maybe I will," I said, and meant it. 3 weeks after Owen's visit, I got another text from that same number. "Business trip to Boston next month. Same client. Thought you should know." This time I didn't delete it right away. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart racing. He was giving me advance notice, letting me decide whether I wanted to see him again. The choice was entirely mine. I thought about the woman I'd been before that night, tired, invisible, going through the motions of a life that felt more like an obligation than a gift. Then I thought about who I'd become since, someone who took pictures because they brought her joy, who laughed more easily, who felt beautiful when she looked in the mirror. "When?" I typed back. His response came quickly. 3 weeks. I can arrange to stay an extra night." I set the phone down and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden I'd been neglecting for months. But instead of seeing the weeds and overgrown bushes, I saw possibilities. Maybe it was time to start taking care of things I'd let wither. Maybe it was time to start taking care of myself. "Let me know the dates," I replied. That night, Ben and I made love for the first time in months. As he moved above me, I closed my eyes and tried to be present, tried to feel something for the man I'd promised to love forever. But even as I responded to his touch, part of me was already counting the days until Owen returned. Some secrets change everything, even when they're never spoken aloud. They live inside you, transforming the way you see yourself in the world around you. As I lay beside Ben afterward, listening to him slip into sleep, I wondered if this was just the beginning of something that would ultimately destroy everything I'd built, or if it was the first step toward becoming the woman I was always meant to be. Time would tell. But for now, I had 3 weeks to decide just how far I was willing to let this go. 3 weeks to choose between the safety of the life I knew and the dangerous promise of the one I was beginning to imagine. Outside, the city hummed with late-night energy, full of people making their own choices, their own mistakes, their own discoveries. I was just one woman among millions, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living instead of just surviving, and that I realized was worth almost any risk. So what would you do? If someone walked into your life and reminded you of who you used to be, who you could still become, would you have the courage to reach for it? Or would you stay safe in the familiar, even if it meant staying invisible? I genuinely want to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story stirred something in you, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for reading, and I'll see you in the next one.